So on January 22nd of this year, the Federal Aviation Administration mandated a brand new rule that basically dictates exactly how fast air traffic controllers are allowed to speak.
Right. Which sounds completely ridiculous on the surface.
It really does. I mean, they updated the mathematical average speech rate required when an automated voice message warns pilots about taxiway construction.
Yeah.
It's the absolute pinnacle of like mind-numbing bureaucratic housekeeping. But on that exact same page, in the exact same routine update, they quietly mandated a brand new, highly secured reporting protocol for unidentified anomalous phenomena.
Yeah.
So today, for you listening, we're looking at how the most, mind-bending mysteries of our universe were just quietly absorbed into federal paperwork. Welcome to the deep dive.
It really is the ultimate hiding in plain sight scenario. Like, the contrast between those two directives just sitting side by side in a federal manual is honestly jarring.
Totally.
But, it tells us everything about how massive institutions are pivoting, like in real time, to handle the unknown.
Yeah. Yeah, and the mission today is to really unpack that pivot. So we're zeroing in on April 10th, 2026, and we're looking at this convergence of sources that, frankly, they just shouldn't belong in the same room.
Right, they really shouldn't.
We have this dry, highly technical 26-page FAA document. It's called Order JO 7210.3EE Change 2.
Rolls right off the tongue.
Exactly. And we're pairing that against a massive, century-spanning civilian data table from the National UFO Reporting Center, or New U-Force.
Which is a huge contrast in itself.
Yeah, and then to cap it all off, we're factoring in this rather tantalizing news headline from the Mirror that's circulating right now about top intelligence officials preparing to release evidence of alien activity.
Right, and the through line here is its infrastructure. We are tracking how a sudden, dramatic shift in modern government infrastructure maps perfectly against a 600-year-old human habit of just staring up at the sky.
Which is fascinating. So let's start with the paperwork, because reading this FAA order is, it's a psychological endurance test.
Oh, absolutely.
The title alone, Facility Operation and Administration, it feels like a sedative. But we need to understand what this document functionally does. I mean, who is actually reading this JO 7210 document, and what happens when, Change 2 drops on their desk?
Well, so this manual is essentially the nervous system of the national airspace. Like, it dictates the day-to-day lives of all air traffic organization personnel.
Okay.
These are the people orchestrating the ballet of, thousands of metal tubes flying at hundreds of miles an hour.
Right.
We're talking about tower controllers, radar operators sitting in these windowless TRACON facilities, and the managers of domestic flight data.
Wow. Okay.
And because aviation relies entirely on predictable physics and, standardized communication, this manual tells them exactly how to do their jobs, down to the syllable.
Down to the syllable, right. So when the airspace evolves, the FAA issues these changes.
Exactly.
And the sheer granularity of these changes is what makes the whole thing feel so just tedious. Like, if you look in the explanation of changes section, you see item C, which updates paragraph 12.6.8.
Right.
And it adds the abbreviation ARV, which stands for Approach Runway Verification, and TCW for Terminal Controller Workstation.
Well,
To the average person, this is literally just alphabet soup.
it is.
What is actually happening, mechanistically, when they add ARV to the manual?
Well, mechanistically, ARV is a safety net. It's a protocol and a technological function that's specifically designed to prevent runway incursions.
Oh, gotcha.
Because before a controller clears a plane to land, they need absolute verification, either visually or through surface radar, that the runway is clear.
Right, clear of, baggage carts or fuel trucks.
Or other planes, yeah. So by officially codifying ARV and TCW into this specific administrative order, the FAA is standardizing the exact button presses and visual checks a controller has to perform at their workstation before they even speak into the microphone.
Wow. So it's really about removing human error from this highly stressful environment.
Exactly. It's tightening up the physical actions tied to these acronyms.
That makes total sense. And then you have item D, which shifts information around for CPDLC and PDC.
Right, which are controller pilot data link communications and pre-departure clearance.
Yeah. And for anyone listening who isn't a pilot, CPDLC is essentially it's a highly secured text messaging system.
Right.
Instead of clogging up the radio waves with a controller verbally reading out this complex string of altitudes and radio frequencies and waypoints.
The pilot would have to seriously write down on an e-board.
Exactly. Instead of that, they just send it as a digital text directly to the aircraft's computer.
Yeah, it dramatically reduces garbled radio chatter. Like if a pilot mishears climb to 1,000 as climb to 10,000, that can be catastrophic.
Oh, for sure.
So the text message just completely eliminates that auditory ambiguity.
It's so practical. And then, of course, we have my absolute favorite bureaucratic update in this whole document, which is item L.
Oh yeah, the 80s update.
Yes. It modifies paragraph 10.41, dealing with the 80s. The Automatic Terminal Information Service. If you've ever tuned a VHF radio near an airport, this is that robotic looped voice repeating the local weather, wind speed, active runways.
Right.
Change 2 explicitly dictates that the 30-second requirement for this loop must be calculated using an average speech rate.
Yeah.
And it mandates the inclusion of taxway construction in that exact timing.
I mean, just consider the bureaucratic energy required there.
Oh, I know.
To debate, draft, review, and then publish a federal mandate about the mathematical speech rate of an automated weather recording just to ensure pilots know a taxiway is being repaved.
It's wild.
But the FAA is an institution obsessed with the mundane because, well, the mundane keeps people alive.
Which brings us to the anomaly, because you're reading through pages of rules about text messaging acronyms and robotic speech rates, and then, right there in the explanation of changes under item B, you hit paragraphs 124 and 474.
The UAP protocol.
The UAP protocol. The FAA is officially standardizing the unknown.
Yeah, the exact text of the change explicitly replaces the abbreviation UFO with UAP.
Right.
It shifts the language from unidentified flying object to unidentified anomalous phenomena.
And I really want to push on that for a second, because we've all seen the term UAP bleed into pop culture over the last few years,
Sure.
mostly as a way for politicians to talk about UFOs without sounding like they're wearing a tinfoil hat,
Yeah, to sound more credible.
Right. But in a federal aviation manual, words have incredibly strict mechanistic definitions. Why is dropping the word flying so critical from an operational standpoint?
That's a great question. It's because flying implies aerodynamic lift.
Okay.
It implies wings, rotors, thrust, and, a reliance on the atmosphere to stay aloft.
Right.
But if an air traffic controller is staring at a certified tower radar display, which, by the way, was also meticulously updated in this very manual under paragraph 10.5.3.
Of course it was.
Right. If they're looking at that display, they're looking for specific data. If a controller sees a radar return that drops from, say, 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second without creating a sonic boom and then submerges into the ocean,
Wow.
that object is not flying.
No, it's just ignoring physics completely.
Exactly, the traditional physics of flight. If you force a controller or a military pilot to classify that event as a flying object, you are basically forcing them to miscategorize the data.
Oh, I see.
Anomalous phenomena broadens the observational net. It allows the observer to accurately report that the thing they're seeing is transmedium or lacking visible propulsion, or maybe it's stationary in hurricane-force winds.
Right.
So the terminology shift isn't just public relations. It is a fundamental upgrade to the data collection parameters.
Okay, that actually changes the entire context of the document for me. It's not a rebrand, it's a new data architecture.
Exactly.
But change 2 goes much further than just a vocabulary update. It introduces a brand new mandatory requirement for air traffic control.
Yes, it does.
They must notify the National Tactical Security Operations, or NTSO, Air Traffic Security Coordinator, of any pilot reports or personnel observation of UAP activity.
And this is huge. This is the establishment of a direct tactical pipeline.
Right.
Historically, the reporting mechanisms for these events were incredibly fractured. If a commercial pilot saw something bizarre, they might call the tower. The tower might log it as an unidentified track, but the data often just died there.
Or the pilot would just land and voluntarily call a civilian reporting center.
Yeah, exactly. There was no integrated mandatory institutional routing.
But now it bypasses the standard post-flight paperwork and goes straight to the NTSO ATSC. It's an immediate tactical security notification. And to facilitate this, the manual actually adds a new reporting checklist.
Right, and the inclusion of a checklist is such a fascinating psychological tool for an organization like the FAA.
Wait, okay, is a checklist actually comforting in this context? Because if I'm a controller and the federal government hands me an official laminated checklist for how to handle physics-defying phenomena, I think that makes the situation significantly more terrifying.
You think so, yeah.
It's a formal admission that these events are happening frequently enough to require standardized federal forms. It's no longer a weather balloon hallucination. It's a verifiable data point that warrants a direct line to national security.
Right. From the perspective of the individual sitting at the radar scope, it might induce some existential dread, certainly.
Yeah, a little bit.
But from an institutional perspective, a checklist is a mechanism for taming panic. Bureaucracy functions by forcing chaotic, unstructured reality into highly structured boxes.
That makes sense.
If a controller encounters something entirely outside their paradigm of understanding, panic is the enemy of aviation safety. The checklist gives their brain a familiar procedural anchor. You don't need to comprehend the glowing orb pulling Mach 20. You just need to know which box to tick, what data points to read off your screen, and what phone number to dial.
Wow.
It converts the terrifying into the clerical.
It reduces the cognitive dissonance. You just follow the steps. But here is the most revealing part of this UAP update, I think. Subparagraph 474B.
Right.
The manual adds a specific website link for the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AAR. But it explicitly states that ATC facilities may refer others, meaning civilians who want to report UAP activity, to this specific website.
Yeah, and notice what the FAA is doing with data streams here. They are aggressively bifurcating the information pipeline.
They are separating the professionals from the public?
Fundamentally, if a verified radar operator or a commercial pilot with thousands of hours of flight experience sees an anomaly, that data is treated as a potential tactical airspace incursion.
And routed securely to the NTSO.
Exactly.
Right.
But if a civilian calls the control tower from their backyard because they saw a strange light,
Yeah.
the controller is now instructed to politely redirect them to a public-facing website.
Which keeps the civilian noise out of the tactical signal.
Yes.
It's a brilliant, if maybe slightly cynical, way of managing a massive influx of public data without letting it paralyze the actual airspace operators.
And that leads to a really crucial question regarding the NTSO itself.
Okay.
If professional verified UAP reports are now being fast-tracked to the National Tactical Security Operations Air Traffic Security Coordinator, what else sits on that coordinator's desk?
Right.
What company are UAPs keeping in this newly restructured system?
This is where we look at Section 3 of our sources, the broader threat centralization. Because if you read past the UAP protocol in Change 2, a very clear, very sobering pattern emerges.
It does.
The NTSO ATSC is not a dedicated paranormal desk.
Right.
It is the tactical nerve center for every single non-standard threat in the sky.
Let's break down the mechanics of the Domestic Events Network, or the DN, which is where this NTSO coordinator sits.
Okay.
The DN is essentially a 24/7 unclassified open-line telephone conference. It links the FAA, the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, the FBI, and various other agencies.
Wow, an open line.
Yeah. If something goes wrong in the sky, you don't hang up and call the military. You just speak into the DN, and everyone hears it simultaneously.
And according to this new FAA document, look at what is now being funneled directly to the NTSO coordinator on that network.
Right.
Paragraph 2131 adds a new reporting requirement for suspicious balloons, roasting them to the NTSO. Paragraph 1952 demands that derelict balloons or things just floating out of control must be reported to the NTSO, which overrides previous authorities like the air defense sector.
Yeah, and keep looking down the list of changes. Look at paragraph 219.
Paragraph 219, handling bomb threat incidents. The update explicitly adds the NTSO ATSC team at the Domestic Events Network as a required notification point for bomb threats. And then Chapter 20 introduces a slew of updates regarding temporary flight restrictions, or TFRs, specifically for unmanned aircraft, meaning rogue drones near sporting events or critical infrastructure.
So if we synthesize the underlying logic of these bureaucratic updates, the FAA is equating the tactical urgency of a UAP with a bomb threat on a passenger jet.
Wow. But I have to challenge the motive here, though.
Sure.
Look at the timeline. It's early 2026. Isn't it highly probable that this entire centralization effort, like lumping UAPs, derelict balloons, and rogue drones all together, is just a massive bureaucratic overreaction to the 2023 Chinese spy balloon fiasco?
That's a fair point.
We all remember that playing out. The military tracking a surveillance balloon across the continent, the jurisdictional confusion, the scramble to figure out who is supposed to shoot it down.
Yeah, it was a mess.
It feels like the FAA was deeply embarrassed by a slow institutional response back then, and this manual is just their way of saying, from now on, anything weird goes straight to the top immediately.
All right.
Why jump to the profound when government inefficiency explains it perfectly?
Well, you are absolutely hitting on the catalyst. The 2023 balloon incidents exposed a critical flaw in airspace domain awareness.
Okay.
The radar systems were previously filtered to ignore slow-moving high-altitude clutter. so controllers wouldn't be overwhelmed by atmospheric noise.
Makes sense.
But when they opened the aperture to look for surveillance balloons, they suddenly started seeing all sorts of other things.
Right, they shot down a few objects in Alaska and the Yukon. Shortly after that, they never fully identified.
Exactly. The catalyst was geopolitical, but the result is an airspace threat convergence.
Ah.
To an air traffic controller, or to the NTSO triage desk, the origin of the anomaly is entirely irrelevant in the first critical minutes.
Right, they just need to manage the immediate airspace.
Yeah, the triage desk doesn't care if you have a sharp bite or a severe allergic reaction. Their only job is to stabilize the patient.
Great analogy.
In the airspace, the NTSO doesn't care if a radar return is a state-sponsored espionage platform, a homemade drone packed with explosives, or an anomalous phenomenon defying the laws of inertia.
Wow.
To the FAA, they all represent the exact same thing, an uncontrolled variable that is not communicating, not operating on an approved flight plan, and posing a catastrophic kinetic risk to a commercial airliner.
So they are basically building an emergency room for the sky and funneling everything that doesn't have a commercial transponder right into it.
So I say.
It really paints a picture of an airspace that has fundamentally fractured. The sky is no longer just a highway for passenger jets and cargo planes.
Not anymore.
It is a highly contested, asymmetrical domain filled with commercial space launches, advanced espionage tech, million-dollar private drones, and unidentified phenomena.
The FAA is essentially admitting that the sky has become too complex to manage with legacy systems. They are forcing the bureaucracy to adapt to a reality that is far stranger and more crowded than it was even 10 years ago.
But here is the paradox that really gets me. The Federal Aviation Administration, with all its billions of dollars in funding, is just now, in early 2026, building the pipeline to document these things systematically.
Right.
They're just now realizing the sky is full of anomalies, but civilians, the general public, we have been rigorously documenting this exact phenomenon on our own for over 6 centuries.
Yes. This is where we transition from institutional reaction to human observation. We really need to look closely at the data from the National UFO Reporting Center.
This no-force data table is incredible. To be clear, this is not a classified government database. It is a public clearinghouse.
Right. Completely public.
If you see something inexplicable, you log onto their site, fill out a form, and it goes into this ledger. The source material provides a raw, chronological count of reports broken down by month and year. And the sheer volume of scrolling required to get to the bottom of this list is staggering.
It is. But what is most compelling about this data set isn't necessarily the modern volume, it's the historical depth.
Yeah.
If you look at the earliest entries, you aren't seeing the post-World War II Roswell era. You are looking deeply into the Middle Ages.
The very first entry in this specific data set is logged in June of the year 1400.
Right.
One single report. I look at that and my mind immediately tries to picture the logistics. Like, how does a sighting from June 1400 even end up in a modern HTML database?
It's wild to think about.
There was no internet. What was the reporting mechanism back then? A monk looking out the window of an abbey, seeing a strange light, and furiously scribbling on a piece of parchment with an ink quill.
Well, it requires us to completely recontextualize how humans process the unknown. Obviously, Newforce did not exist in the 15th century.
Of course.
These ancient data points are gathered retrospectively. Modern researchers scour historical chronicles, town ledgers, and ecclesiastical records for descriptions of anomalous aerial events.
Oh, wow.
And then they translate those historical accounts into modern database entries.
That makes sense. But imagine the cosmological worldview of that observer in 1400. If they saw what we now call a UAP, they didn't have the conceptual framework of extraterrestrial craft or secret military black project.
No, not at all.
They interpreted the sky through a theological or mythological lens. They would have described a glowing chariot or a celestial battle between angels or a flaming shield.
Which is exactly why analyzing this longitudinal data is so complex. We have to separate the actual physical phenomenon from the cultural vocabulary used to describe it.
Right.
As we move up the timeline, September 1639, August 1714, June 1790, we see a steady, sparse trickle of observation.
The source also notes 297 reports coded simply as 00, meaning there was no specific month or year attached, just a general historical era.
Yeah.
It really highlights the fragmentary nature of looking backward.
But consider the environment of those early centuries. There was zero light pollution. The night sky was incredibly vivid and a central part of daily human navigation and timekeeping. People were intimately familiar with the patterns of the stars, and the movements of the planets.
So if something broke that pattern, it was immediately glaring. But let me play skeptic here for a minute.
Okay, go for it.
Couldn't the vast majority of those historical sightings just be gross misidentifications of perfectly normal, though rare, meteorological events?
Oh, absolutely.
Like a particularly bright meteor shower, a comet, or complex atmospheric refraction like a sundog,
Sure.
things that a 17th century farmer just didn't have the scientific literacy to explain.
Undoubtedly, many of them were exactly that. But from a sociological standpoint, the misidentification is almost as valuable as a genuine anomaly.
Really? How so?
Because the value of this ledger isn't in proving that aliens visited the Renaissance. The
Yeah.
value is proving that the human instinct to detect, categorize, and record an anomaly is deeply hardwired into our species.
Oh, wow. That's a great point.
Long before the FAA invented radar or controller pilot data link communications, humans possessed an internal reporting protocol. We look up, we recognize a break in the pattern, and we try to communicate it to our community.
That's fascinating.
The FAA in 2026 is just formalizing a 600-year-old human habit.
That is a brilliant framework. The checklist has always existed in our minds. The government just finally printed it out.
Exactly.
And as we track this data forward into the 1800s, August 1860, November 1866, you can almost feel the Industrial Revolution beginning to shift our framework.
Yeah, you really can.
As humans started building machines, we started interpreting anomalies in the sky not as angels, but as mysterious airships.
The cultural lens dictates the observation. But regardless of the lens, the frequency of reporting remains incredibly low for centuries.
Just one or two a decade.
Right. Even through the early 1900s, one report in 1905, two in 1910. It's a totally flat baseline.
Until we hit the modern era where the data absolutely fractures, the reports don't just scale linearly with population growth, they experience violent, massive spikes.
Yes, they do.
Let's look at the peaks in this new force data, because decoding these spikes tells us so much about human psychology.
Okay, so the modern baseline, looking at the late 1990s and early 2000s, hovers around a relatively steady 200 to 300 reports per month. It's consistent background noise.
But then you look at the summer of 2013 and 2014, the numbers go vertical.
They really do.
July 2013 had 1,008 reports. August 2013 had 939. And then the following year, July 2014, hits 11,141 reports.
Wow.
That is the highest single month recorded in the visible modern era of this data set. Over 1,000 people in a single month feeling compelled to log an anomaly.
To understand a spike of that magnitude, you have to look for psychosocial feedback loops.
Okay.
Summer months naturally trend higher in this database simply due to human behavior. The weather is clear, people are spending evenings outdoors, camping, hosting barbecues.
More eyes are on the sky.
Exactly.
But 1,000 reports isn't just a busy barbecue season.
No, definitely not. A spike over 1,000 usually indicates a compounding external variable.
Like,
It could be a highly publicized astronomical event, like an exceptionally bright meteor breaking up in the atmosphere witnessed across multiple states.
okay, that makes sense.
Or it could be a major military exercise utilizing high-altitude flares over a populated area.
Right.
But equally powerful is the media feedback loop.
Yeah.
If a compelling UFO story goes viral on social media or local news, it primes the public consciousness. People step out onto their porches specifically looking for anomalies.
Ah, I see.
And suddenly, Venus low on the horizon or a conventional aircraft catching the sunset looks highly suspicious.
It's the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon, but for the sky. Once you are primed to look for something, you see it everywhere.
Yes, exactly.
But there is another massive spike in this data that has a very different and very profound underlying cause. Let's look at the spring of 2020.
March 2020 jumps to 844 reports, and then April 2020 hits an astonishing 1,070 reports.
What happened in April 2020? The entire planet went into lockdown.
Exactly. The onset of the global pandemic fundamentally altered the human relationship with the sky for a brief window. Right.
Commercial air traffic plummeted by over 70%. The skies were largely devoid of the usual grid of contrails. Industrial smog cleared out of major cities, drastically reducing light pollution.
And more importantly, you had hundreds of millions of people suddenly trapped in their homes.
Yes.
They were dealing with unprecedented collective anxiety, their normal routines were shattered, and they had absolutely nothing to do but stare out their windows or sit in their backyards.
It was an extreme shift in the signal-to-noise ratio of daily life. When the relentless noise of commuting, working, and socializing ground to a halt, Human observational bandwidth expanded massively.
Which raises a fascinating philosophical question. Does the anomaly exist more frequently than we realize, and
Yeah.
we just usually lack the bandwidth and the quiet skies to notice it?
It's a great question. Or, conversely, does idle bandwidth lead to hypervigilance?
Oh, interesting.
Because we must also factor in technological shifts occurring at that exact moment. April 2020 was right in the middle of SpaceX aggressively launching massive constellations of Starlink satellites. Oh, right, the trains of lights moving in a perfect line across the sky.
Imagine being an anxious civilian in lockdown. The sky is quieter than you've ever seen it. You look up, and an unbroken line of 60 uniformly spaced lights glides silently across the stars.
If you don't follow aerospace news, that looks like an invading armada.
Completely. It is highly probable that a massive percentage of those 1,070 reports were direct misidentifications of Starlink deployments by a populace that suddenly had the free time to look up.
But again, the data is valid as a metric of human attention. Even if they were satellites, the surge proves that when you remove distractions, humans immediately revert to their ancient instinct.
Observing the sky and reporting the unknown.
Exactly. Now let's contrast those historical lockdown numbers with the very recent data provided in our source leading right up to our current month, April 2026.
The numbers are dropping fast.
Yeah, January 2026 logged 277 reports. February dropped to 172. March had 189. And April, as of the data collection, sits at just 46.
The civilian reporting baseline is normalizing. It is dropping back down to those pre-pandemic, pre-viral spike levels.
Society is busy again. The noise has returned.
But the core reporting mechanism is still alive. A couple of hundred people every single month, without fail, are encountering something they cannot explain.
Right. Which forces us into the final and most crucial synthesis of this deep dive.
Because we have a stark contradiction on our hands.
We do. If the civilian data in 2026 is normalizing, if the public is relatively calm and distracted, why is the federal institution suddenly escalating its response to a fever pitch?
It's the big question.
Why is the FAA right now in January 2026 building a highly structured mandatory reporting pipeline to a national tactical security desk? Why the sudden urgent need for a UAP checklist?
To answer that, we had to pull back from the raw data and look at the broader geopolitical and cultural context surrounding these bureaucratic moves.
Okay.
Agencies like the FAA do not operate in a vacuum. They operate in anticipation of legislative and intelligence shifts. And that is where our third source, the news headline, provides the missing context.
Right. We have a headline from The Mirror, dated 2026, and the text is blunt. It reads, "Top intelligence officials to release evidence of alien activity in 2026.
Before we analyze this, we need to set very firm, objective guardrails.
Definitely.
As analysts, we are looking at this headline not as verified scientific proof of extraterrestrial life, but as a potent piece of source media driving current public anticipation.
Absolutely. For you listening, we are analyzing the effect of this narrative, not endorsing the claim.
Right.
The reality is, whether the intelligence community actually has a crash saucer in a hangar, or whether they just have a stack of blurry radar data they can't explain, the narrative of impending disclosure is circulating at the highest levels of the press and the political sphere. That is a fact of the current climate.
And that context is everything. Because if top intelligence officials or congressional committees are indeed preparing to release a massive declassified report in 2026,
Yeah.
even if that report just formally admits we have objects in our airspace, they outmaneuver our jets, and we have no idea who built them, the infrastructure must be prepared for the fallout.
Wait, let's play that out mechanistically. If the government officially admits that UAPs represent a genuine, physics-defying reality, what is the immediate day one consequence for the national airspace?
Total unmitigated civilian saturation.
Wow.
You would see a spike in public interest in skywatching that makes the April 2020 pandemic lockdown look like a statistical rounding error.
Yeah.
Every single person with a smartphone will be staring at the sky.
And when millions of people stare at the sky, they are going to see things: drones, satellites, weather balloons, birds catching the light. And who do they call?
They call the police, and the police call the local air traffic control tower.
Oh.
If a tower controller suddenly has 50 local citizens flooding the phone lines, claiming there is a glowing orb over the interstate, the controller cannot effectively manage the commercial Boeing 737 trying to land on runway 29er.
The tactical channels would be completely paralyzed by civilian panic.
Exactly. Which brings us all the way back to FAA Order JO 7210.3E Change 2.
Ah.
This isn't just an administrative update. It is the architectural blueprint for managing a paradigm shift.
The FAA is preemptively building the infrastructure for disclosure.
Yes. You cannot have an intelligence drop about UAPs without having a pressure release valve ready for the public.
Right.
That is exactly what paragraph 474B is. The mandate to redirect civilians to the ARO website is the release valve.
That makes perfect sense.
The FAA is instructing its personnel. When the disclosure happens and the public floods the towers with reports, do not let them clog our secure networks. Give them the AR web address. Let the civilian surge be absorbed by a public-facing server.
And simultaneously, they are securing the actual critical data. Because if the sky is suddenly flooded with perceived anomalies, the FAA needs a rock-solid, unquestionable pipeline to separate a genuine tactical threat from a paranoid civilian misidentifying a commercial drone.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That is why they mandated the NTSO ATSC route for verified pilot and personnel reports.
Wow.
They are aggressively sorting the data stream's public noise to the website, verified tactical signal to the security desk before the floodgates of disclosure are opened.
They are putting the safety nets up before the Trapeze Act begins. It is genuinely breathtaking when you view it through that lens.
It really is.
This incredibly dry 26-page document about runway verification lights and text messaging acronyms is actually the federal government bracing for psychological impact. It's bureaucracy preparing for contact with the unknown.
It proves that when reality fundamentally shifts, it rarely happens with a dramatic presidential address or a movie-style monologue. It happens with a subtle change to a mathematical speech rate and a newly inserted checklist in a facility operations manual. The profound is always buried in the mundane.
And that perfectly encapsulates our journey today. Let's bring it all back to you, the listener.
Yeah.
We started this deep dive staring at the most tedious paperwork imaginable. A manual designed to standardize the boring mechanics of altitude maps and taxiway construction.
Right.
But by refusing to just skim the surface, we discovered a highly organized, federally mandated pipeline for routing the unknown directly to national security.
We mapped that quiet, modern institutional shift against the deep, chaotic ledger of human history.
We did.
We saw that from a monk staring out of a window in the year 1400 to an anxious citizen sitting in their backyard during the 2020 lockdowns, our instinct to document anomalies in the sky has remained unbroken.
And we placed both the federal mandate and the civilian history against the looming backdrop of a 2026 intelligence release, realizing that the government might just be laying the bureaucratic track right in front of a massive speeding train.
It is a remarkable convergence of past observation and future preparation.
Which leaves me with one final, slightly provocative thought for you to ponder as we wrap up.
Okay.
We've spent this hour analyzing how the FAA just mandated that air traffic controllers direct civilians to a website when they see a UAP. They have built an incredibly efficient system to manage the anomalous.
True.
But if that headline from the Mirror proves true and the evidence actually drops, if we learn what these things are, how they operate, and where they come from, what happens to the checklist?
Oh, wow. That is the ultimate paradox of categorization.
Right, because the moment the anomalous is finally identified and understood, it instantly stops being a UAP. It is no longer unidentified, it just becomes traffic.
Yeah.
And if it's just traffic, how long until the FAA has to write a brand new, incredibly dry 40-page memo updating the standard separation distances for transmedium spacecraft?
Just another terms of service agreement for the universe. The bureaucracy will always expand to swallow the anomaly.
Something to think about the next time you look up. Keep your eyes on the skies, read the fine print, and thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
This is Seek and Explain. Like, comment, and subscribe, and enjoy your stay.